really, really good metal drummers. He was never even that. Let alone now, he's just lazy and shitty. Sorry, but that's what he is. Now, let's change it up to not lazy and not shitty. This is the best James has sounded in 20 years. This is probably some of the better riffs that Kirk Hammett's written in 20 years. Robert Trujillo is really good on the bass. I mean, the rest of the band sounds great. The other thing I said earlier in the news segment is this is the first time that it seems like Metallica's having fun doing music and being a band for the first time in forever, and that's great to see. They're having fun, they're laughing, they're doing interviews and enjoying being in the music business and enjoying themselves. I mean, you see movies like Some Kind of Monster and you hear all the stories where they hate each other. They, are not talking. James is in and out of rehab. I mean, it's just a mess. They are the most dysfunctional family on the planet that's a band, even almost right up there with Guns N' Roses, really, has seemed to finally be like, let's just have fun and make music again. And I will say, even though I'm being critical, Atlas Rise is a pretty good song. Now That We're Dead could easily be a Black Album track. Moth into Flame, another good song that I like there. Not my favorite. Very Black Album sounding as well, at least in my opinion. Dream No More could have been off a Load. It's the first track on the album. Now, again, we're talking Hardwired, Atlas Rise, Now That We're Dead, Moth into Flame. 4 tracks where I'm going, pretty good. Well done, Metallica. Dream No More was the first song where I went, meh. Halo on Fire, to your point, very bluesy. 8 minutes long, sounds like something that could be on Load again. Whereas Confusion almost sounds Justice-ish to me. I dig it a lot, actually. It's one of my standout songs on the album. Man Unkind could totally do without. Very bluesy, mid-tempo, decent at best. Here Comes Revenge starts out like a track that you could hear on Justice, but then it just slows down, kind of Black Album-ish, cool riff there. Am I Savage? It's okay. Background music, I guess, if I were to listen to it, but not something I would seek out on the album. Murder One starts out like Fade to Black, but then it just kind of becomes this mid-paced, decent at best rocker. And then we finish with Spit Out the Bone, which is my favorite song on the album. Could easily be an And Justice for All track. Ends the album very, very, very well. And I love it. I think it's one of the better songs that they've done in a long, long time. Spit Out the Bone's my favorite song on the album, and probably the best song they've done since anything on the Black Album. And I could almost, that's a stretch. There's some songs on the Black Album I really like, and none of them are the ones that are popular. Spit Out the Bone's a great, great song. And so when I'm looking at killer tracks, I think Moth into Flame's really good. Confusion's good. Spit Out the Bone's really good. Decent tracks we're looking at Now That We're Dead, Hardwired, and Atlas Rise. But unfortunately, we got Murder One, Am I Savage, Man Unkind, Dream No More, and Halo on Fire. That's 5 tracks I would flat out just skip every time I listen to the album. And so you're left, at least to me, with better than you've been in a long time, but still not something that I would say is a killer album that you must own. Just in my opinion. Will I listen to it again? Sure, because there's some really good tracks on here. But not something that I would say that I would run out and buy with no, not to use a Metallica reference, but no remorse. It's an album I don't know. Overall score, however, it's a definite step in the right direction, and I give it a 7.5 out of 10 as well. You gave it an 8, never mind. Close. So, yeah, we're close. Some of the songs that are good are really damn good. Some of the other ones are, this is a Load track at best, and I thought Load was shitty. So why would I think this is any better?
Hi, this is Evan Reed of Sirius Black. You're listening to According to Metal.
3, 2, 1. Joining us on According to Metal on this episode, of course, and Leave It to Biv once again to find a band that is just the perfect guest for According to Metal and all of our listeners. That's, of course, you out there. Because the reason why we started this podcast in the first place is to be two buddies talking metal, and more importantly, to give us the ability to get the voices and the names of the bands and the music of the bands that are out there that sadly a lot of people haven't heard of and need to hear of. And these guys are absolutely no exception to this rule. Joining us, of course, from a state just a couple states away from where Biv and I recorded. According to Metal, it's colder even up there than it is here right now. But curious to hear more about what made his band what it is, about the metal scene in his neck of the woods, and all types of good things. We can't wait to talk to him. So joining us, of course, on the show is Matt Hodsdon from Chaos Frame, and we're excited that he's here. Matt, welcome to According to Metal, my friend.
What's up?
What's going on, man? So I have a question for you. Now,
yep,
I love to ask this of all of our guests because I always find it funny. And as a metalhead and as a metal fan or even a musician, we seem to want to put ourselves in categories. You know, we want to say this is power metal, this is thrash metal, this is progressive metal, this is death, this is whatever. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a question in regards to some things. And I saw this on your Facebook page, so I got to ask. You mentioned that Chaos Frame will never do the following. You will not have lengthy wank solos. You won't rhyme fire with desire, which I guess would mean that you'll never do a Machine Head cover.
No.
You won't break it down, bro, which I have to applaud you for because we'll have no unearthed breakdowns here on a Chaos Frame record. It also mentions that you won't give you up or let you down or run around and hurt you. Which I appreciate the Rick Astley reference. I really
You got to remember that was a few years ago.
Well, I know that's fine, but I mean you're trying to rickroll the people listening, and I appreciate that. But I'm guessing then, based on that, you're totally fine with deserting you, making you cry, say goodbye, and telling a lie because you left those out. So apparently you're fine with that.
Hey, I mean, I can't promise anything really.
But you also mentioned, on a serious note, you bring the riffs, you change keys a lot, you change time signatures a lot, blast beats, which I've heard a lot on the stuff that you do, which I really think is really, really cool because a lot of bands do it, and either it's just flat out death metal and that's what you expect, or some bands force it and you guys don't. You also mentioned you have epic parts and experiment a lot, and you couldn't do a better job of describing at least what I hear of your sound so far. But that's what my ears are. I'm just a metalhead who listens to metal. Yeah, if you had to kind of put yourself in a quote-unquote category, how would you explain Chaos Frame's music to somebody?
Well, that whole thing about, I was, of course, younger at the time, and I was sort of making a list of goals sort of with that. I'm not as rigid, but it still generally holds up to what we're doing, like progressive metal is my main thing, but I don't like a lot of aspects of it still, like the long, not that I don't like long songs, but unnecessarily long songs or parts that drag out,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned lengthy wank solos.
Yeah, we're trying to subvert kind of the negative stereotypes of progressive metal. And as far as like the blast beats and that kind of stuff, they're all tools. They're just tools that are available to us. And for some parts they're appropriate and for some they're not, but it's always an option,
No, I think that's perfectly fine, man. And I'll tell you what, truth be told, and Biv can tell you this, one of my initial turnoffs to progressive metal, Biv, you want to tell them what it was? Do you remember this?
It was exactly that. Well, yeah, it was exactly that, that whole thing, that, the 23-minute songs that went absolutely nowhere. And I fell in love with Dream Theater in the early days, like, going back to like Awake and Images of War.
Oh, yeah. Those, first 2 or 3 albums, actually, I still like. I like, sporadic stuff throughout their discography. And I know our other guitarist, Andy, he's a big fan, too. It's just sometimes it's too much for me.
Exactly. And that's where I had the problem with them, post 2000 it was like once Jordan came onto the keyboard, it was like, look what we can do. And it was like, just weird crap all over the place for 8 minutes that went nowhere.
Yeah. I liked Kevin Moore a lot. But like, the ragtime stuff or just the weird, joke parts kind of almost, I didn't like those so much.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it sounds like you and I are definitely on the same page as far as our taste in progressive metal, for sure. But just curious. Now, obviously, you're from the state of Minnesota, and you're on Nightmare Records, for those that don't know, which is also based out of Minnesota, with Lance King, who was also a friend of the show, was on episode 1. Those that want to go back and listen to it. But how did that relationship start with you and Lance? I mean, with Nightmare Records, did he hear of or see you guys, or did you know him through a mutual contact, or how did that come to be?
Yeah. So ever since I was a kid, I was listening to stuff off the Nightmare label, especially Beyond Twilight, who are amazing. I guess they're not around anymore, but they were one of my favorite bands. And so with this album, our mix engineer was Carlos Alvarez from Dirty Viking Audio in Philadelphia. And he's the one who got us in contact. You know, like, even though Lance is local, we didn't have really an in with him until Carlos put in a good word. And so eventually, you know, he sent him the master, and he listened to it and decided that, yeah, it's appropriate for Nightmare Records.
Excellent. No, Jason, I hope you don't mind. I have a follow-up to that.
No, go ahead, man.
So that being said, and being that Lance is a veteran in the industry, both as a musician and as the owner of Nightmare Records, did he pretty much just take your master and say, hey, we're going to run with this? Or did he come back and say, you know, hey, I've got a couple suggestions for you guys? Or was he just pretty much hands off, like, hey, I'm just gonna run with it the way it is?
Yeah, it was pretty hands off. I mean, the album, you know, when we sent it to him, it was 100% complete, mixed, mastered. It would have been a big thing to change anything at that point. As far as like marketing or image, he did suggest changing the band name for like more unique search results, I guess, online. But, you know, to us, it wasn't that big of a deal. And, you know, we got him to change his mind on that.
At one point in time, Matt, you were listed as the guitar, bass, and keyboard player.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't seem like that's the case anymore, unless I'm missing something. But what's funny is you get to hear from the people we've talked to of how they become what they become. I can't tell you how many lead singers I know that had no desire to sing, but they wanted to play drums or they wanted to play guitar, and they got screwed out of the deal. And so they're like, all right, well, guess I'm singing. Obviously, it's not your situation, but obviously you play 3 different instruments, or at least at one point did for the band. What is your favorite one that you actually like to play? I mean, many would guess the guitar, but we could be totally wrong in assuming that.
Well, here's the thing. Guitar, you know, I'm 90% just a guitarist, I would say. I mean, I can hack it on keyboards. I'm working on drums and vocals, too, but I'm not...
No, really? Wow.
I wouldn't say I'm good at any of them, per se, except guitar. But, you know, for the purposes of recording, like, I can play some keyboard leads and, you know, do a little doodly, whatever. I couldn't play, like, a concerto piano piece or anything, but it's good enough, you know.
Well, speaking of vocals now, Dave Brown, your vocalist, he lives in, if I'm not mistaken, Delaware. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. And so obviously it makes it very challenging to ever get together to do a live performance. And I know it's not realistic to do that because, you know, you guys, as I read, you know, you guys all have regular careers and, you know, you do this more as I don't want to call it a hobby, but it's certainly not your living.
Yeah, it's a labor of love or whatever you want to call it.
Sure, absolutely. So I've seen this, especially with bands that are in your situation where they can't do it full time, even though they'd love to. So instead of going on tour, they're doing some of the metal fest and, you know, things like that, like Prog Power or even some of the smaller ones as well. Is that something that's in the future for you guys in 2017 or 2018? Can we expect to see any live performances from you guys?
If anybody offered us, yeah, I mean, definitely Prog Power. It might not be realistic right now to look at that, but yeah, we'd be there in an instant, man. You know, a smaller fest too, we would definitely consider.
Well, you know, Jason and I were actually talking about sponsoring a band for Prog Power. So,
but they have to decide they want us there, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And why they wouldn't, I have no idea. And with
you also have to understand the power that Biv holds. It's pretty amazing. It's
right.
Yeah, I'm in awe already.
You should be. So let me ask you something to lighten the mood a little bit. We've asked this question of a handful of singers and guitar players, you name it. And I noticed, by the way, for those of you who don't have the pleasure of being friends with Matt on Skype as we record all our interviews with. The image that I get from Matt is of Shaq with the Shaq Fu image, which may tie in to the greatest Sega Genesis game I could think of, really. So,
yes, the Genesis version is the superior version.
I agree.
You're well versed in Shaq Fu lore.
Sweet. I love you already.